Syrah was a warrior from a faraway planet. Her people, the Talion, were strong and powerful. They had no time for emotions like love or friendship. They believed in only one thing: strength. The stronger you were, the better you were. And Syrah was one of the strongest. She had fought many battles and won them all. She was known across the galaxy as a fearsome warrior. No one could defeat her. But there was something that no victory could fill: loneliness. Syrah's people lived without love. They didn't need it. For the Talons, emotions were weak. They believed emotions only slowed them down, made them soft. That was why, even though Syrah was surrounded by her people, she always felt alone. No one cared about her, and she didn't care about anyone. That was how the Talons lived: strong, cold, and alone. At first, Syrah didn't mind. She had always been like this. She had no time for friends or love. All she needed was power. But over time, something inside her began to change. The longer she fought, the more victories she won, the emptier she felt. There was a quiet place in her heart that no battle could fill. She had everything a warrior could want, but nothing she needed. One evening, as Syrah stood alone on the balcony of her ship, she looked out into the stars. The lights in the sky looked beautiful, but they reminded her of something sad. The stars were far away, just like she was from everyone. She was always alone, always moving through space with no one beside her, no one to talk to, no one to share her thoughts with. As the ship hummed softly around her, Syrah sighed. She didn't like to admit it, but the loneliness had become a part of her life. Every day it was there, like a shadow she could not escape. She hated it, but she didn't know how to make it go away. There were times when she thought about leaving everything behind: her people, her battles, her missions. But where would she go? What would she do? She had nothing. No family, no friends, just power. And even that didn't feel like enough anymore. Syrah knew she couldn't stay like this forever. But she also knew that, as a Talion, she had no choice. Her people didn't understand loneliness. They didn't understand the need for connection. And Syrah had never shown any sign of weakness. She had to keep up the front. She had to remain the strong, cold warrior everyone admired. But inside, a small voice was growing louder. It whispered to her that there was more to life than fighting and winning. She wasn't sure what that more was, but she felt it. She closed her eyes and leaned against the cold metal of the ship. She thought about the times she had fought alongside other warriors. They had always been quiet, focused on the mission. There was never any conversation about feelings or hopes or dreams. It was just business. It was just about winning. But even in those moments, Syrah had noticed something. A spark that came from the humans she had fought against. She had always dismissed it, thinking it was foolishness. But now she wondered, what was that spark? What did they have that she didn't? Syrah wasn't sure. She only knew one thing: she couldn't live like this anymore. Her mission was to explore a new planet, a mission that was expected to last several months. She had no idea what to expect, but she hoped it would be different. Maybe there was something waiting for her on this planet. Maybe, just maybe, she could find what she had been searching for. She didn't know if it was love or friendship or something else, but she knew she couldn't return home feeling the same way. She had to find out what was missing from her life. She had to find out what the humans had that made them so different from her. As the ship sped through the stars, Syrah's heart beat faster. She had always been fearless, always confident in her abilities. But now she felt nervous. She didn't know what she was searching for, but she knew that this journey was the start of something new, something that might finally end the loneliness that had followed her for so long. Her ship cut through the darkness of space, moving closer to the unknown planet. Syrah stared out of the window, the stars blurring as they moved faster. She didn't know what would happen when she landed, but one thing was clear: her life would never be the same again. Syrah sat in the cockpit of her ship, staring at the glowing map of stars ahead. Her mission was simple: travel to a distant planet, explore it, and report back to her people. But even though the task sounded easy, Syrah knew it was not going to be as simple as it seemed. She had been on many missions before, but this one felt different. The planet she was heading to was unknown. No one had ever been there before, and that made Syrah uneasy. It wasn't fear that made her nervous. She had faced worse dangers than this. It was the unknown. The thought of landing on a planet no one had ever explored before filled her with a strange sense of excitement mixed with caution. What if something unexpected happened? What if the planet had creatures or dangers that could threaten her? But Syrah pushed these thoughts aside. She was a warrior, and warriors didn't let fear control them. The ship hummed softly around her as it cut through the silence of space. Syrah's hands gripped the controls tightly. She was used to traveling alone, and this mission was no different. She had no one to talk to, no one to share her thoughts with. She liked it that way. She didn't need anyone else. But for the first time, she wished she had someone to talk to. Someone who could tell her that everything would be fine. The planet was still far away, but as Syrah looked at it on the screen, she could see that it was a beautiful world. The surface was covered in vast forests, oceans, and mountains. It looked peaceful. It looked like a place where life could thrive. But Syrah knew better. Looks could be deceiving. The Talons had been to many worlds that seemed calm at first, only to reveal dangers hidden beneath the surface. She had learned not to trust appearances. Syrah leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for a moment. She tried to push away the feeling that something was waiting for her on this planet. She had been on dangerous missions before, but this one felt different. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the signal she had picked up earlier, that strange call from the planet. It had sounded so full of emotion, so unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't just a signal. It was as if something, or someone, was reaching out to her. She didn't know who or what it was, but it made her feel uneasy. The ship's voice broke her thoughts. Approaching destination, preparing for landing. Syrah opened her eyes and looked at the screen. The planet was getting closer now. She couldn't avoid it anymore. She had to go down, find out what was on that planet, and finish her mission. The Talons had no time for hesitation. This mission was important, and Syrah couldn't afford to fail. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. Her hand moved to the controls, and she guided the ship toward the planet's surface. The ship shook slightly as it entered the planet's atmosphere, and Syrah felt the pressure build as she fought to keep it steady. It was a dangerous move, but she was a skilled pilot. She had landed on many dangerous worlds before, and this one would be no different. As the ship descended, Syrah couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm wash over her. Despite the danger, despite the unknown, she felt like this was what she was meant to do. She was a warrior, and this mission would be no different from any other battle she had fought. She had her strength, she had her skills, and she would succeed. The ship touched down softly on the planet's surface, the engines humming as they powered down. Syrah's heart raced in her chest. She was here. She had arrived. The mission had begun. She stood up, her boots clicking on the metal floor as she walked toward the exit. She put on her helmet and prepared to leave the ship. Outside, the air smelled fresh, and the ground beneath her feet was soft and warm. It felt different from the cold, lifeless planets she was used to. The planet seemed full of life, but Syrah knew that didn't mean it was safe. She stepped out of the ship and looked around. The landscape was beautiful, but something about it made her feel uneasy. The trees were tall and thick, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and earth. It seemed peaceful, but Syrah knew that peace could be dangerous. She reached for her weapon, checking that it was secure. She wasn't taking any chances. She had no idea what she would find here, but she was ready for anything. The Talion didn't back down from danger. She wouldn't either. As Syrah moved through the dense forest, she felt that strange feeling again, that something was watching her. She looked around, but saw nothing. The feeling was hard to ignore. It was like the planet itself was alive, waiting. But alive with what? She didn't know, but she would find out soon enough. Syrah moved cautiously through the thick forest, her boots crunching the leaves beneath her feet. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of unknown plants and the hum of distant creatures. Everything seemed calm, but that uneasy feeling still lingered in her chest. She couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong. The planet was too quiet, too still. It was as if something was waiting, watching her every move. She paused and scanned the area. The trees stretched high above her, blocking much of the sky. A few small animals scurried in the underbrush, but nothing else moved. It was peaceful, but Syrah couldn't trust it. She was a warrior, and warriors never let their guard down. Something's off, Syrah muttered to herself, her eyes narrowing as she looked around. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the trees, a loud booming noise, followed by what sounded like explosions. The ground shook beneath her feet, and Syrah instinctively crouched low, her hand reaching for her weapon. Her heart raced. That wasn't the noise of nature. That was the sound of war. Syrah moved quickly, her feet carrying her toward the source of the noise. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew one thing. This wasn't part of her mission. She had come to explore, not to fight. But her training kicked in. She couldn't ignore a battle. She had to find out what was going on, and she had to be ready. As she moved through the forest, the sounds of war grew louder. The explosions were followed by the roar of engines and the screech of weapons firing. Syrah could feel the tension building in the air. This was no ordinary fight. It was a full-scale war, and it was happening right in front of her. She emerged from the trees and into a clearing. What she saw took her by surprise. There, in the middle of the clearing, a battle was raging. There were humans, soldiers, dressed in worn uniforms, fighting against an enemy Syrah had never seen before. They were tall, with dark, armored bodies and sharp weapons. They moved with deadly precision, attacking the humans without mercy. Syrah's eyes widened as she realized the truth. The war had already started, and the humans were losing. The humans fought back with everything they had, but the enemy was too strong. Syrah could see the fear in their eyes, the desperation as they tried to hold their ground. It was clear that they were outmatched. There was no way they could win without help. Syrah didn't hesitate. She ran forward, her weapon already in her hand. The humans had no idea she was there, but she didn't care. She had no time to waste. She needed to help them, even if she didn't understand why. There was something about this battle, something about these humans, that made her want to protect them. She aimed her weapon and fired. The blast hit one of the enemy soldiers, knocking him down. The humans turned, surprised to see a new fighter on their side. But Syrah didn't stop. She fired again, then again, taking down several of the enemies with quick, precise shots. The humans began to fight back harder, emboldened by her presence. Syrah's skill in battle was unmatched, and she fought with a cold, calculated precision. Her movements were fast and deadly, taking down enemies one by one. The tide of the battle began to shift. The humans weren't winning yet, but they were no longer losing either. Syrah fought alongside them, her eyes focused on the enemies around her. She didn't care who they were or where they came from. All that mattered was stopping them. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, the sounds of explosions and gunfire filling the air. Finally, the enemy began to retreat, their forces dwindling under the pressure of the humans and Syrah's attacks. The last of the enemy soldiers fled, and the battlefield fell silent. The humans were left standing, bruised and bloodied, but victorious. Syrah looked around at the battlefield. The humans were exhausted, but they had won. She had helped them. But why? Why had she fought for them? She didn't know the answer, but the question lingered in her mind. One of the human soldiers, a man with short brown hair and a scar across his cheek, approached her. He looked at her with surprise, his eyes widening when he saw her alien armor and weapon. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough but grateful. Syrah didn't answer at first. She wasn't used to talking to humans, and she wasn't sure what to say. But she knew one thing. The battle wasn't over yet. She had helped them, but she couldn't stay here. She had to complete her mission. And yet there was something about these humans that made her hesitate. She had never felt this way before. "I'm here to help," she said quietly, her voice cold. The man nodded, still eyeing her cautiously. "Well, thanks. We could have used more like you." Sarah didn't reply. She turned and began walking away. The war was far from over, and she had no time to stay and talk. But as she walked, she felt a strange sense of pride. She had helped them. And maybe, just maybe, she had found something more than just power. Sarah walked away from the battlefield, her mind racing. The sounds of war still echoed in her ears, but now they were fading, replaced by the strange quiet of the planet. She had helped the humans, but she didn't understand why. She had never cared about anyone before, and yet something about their struggle had made her fight. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt a pull in her heart, a feeling she couldn't explain. She moved through the dense forest, her thoughts swirling. The battle had been brutal, but it was over. The enemy was gone, and the humans had survived. Barely. Sarah knew she couldn't stay. She had come to explore, not to fight wars. But part of her didn't want to leave. There was something about these humans, something that made her want to stay and find out more. As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. She could feel the presence of the human soldier, the one who had approached her after the battle, the one who had looked at her with surprise and gratitude. Sarah didn't know his name, but she knew he was different from the others. He wasn't like the cold, heartless soldiers she had seen before. There was something warm about him. "Hey," the soldier called out, his voice soft but clear. "You left pretty fast back there. We should talk." Sarah didn't stop walking. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to explain herself. But something in his voice made her pause. She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. The soldier was standing just a few feet away, his eyes studying her with curiosity. He looked tired, his clothes torn from the battle, but he was still standing strong. He wasn't like the other humans she had seen. There was a quiet strength in him. "Why did you help us?" the soldier asked, his voice steady but full of wonder. "You're not one of us. You didn't have to fight, but you did. Why?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She didn't know how to explain. She had fought because it felt like the right thing to do, but she couldn't put it into words. She wasn't used to explaining her actions, especially not to someone she had just met. "I fight to survive," she said finally, her voice cold and distant. "And you were fighting for your life. I don't leave people to die." The soldier seemed to accept that answer, though he didn't look fully satisfied. He took a step closer, his eyes softening as he studied her. "You're not like the others," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone fight like that. You're different." Sarah looked at him sharply. She had never let anyone get this close to her. She didn't like it. She didn't like the way his eyes made her feel, like he was seeing something inside her that she didn't want to show. She was a warrior, not someone who needed to be seen or understood. But the soldier didn't look at her like she was just a warrior. He looked at her like she was something more. And that made her uncomfortable. "I'm just a warrior," Sarah said, her voice harsh. "Nothing more." The soldier shook his head. "No, you're not. I can tell. You've got something inside you. Something I've never seen before. It's not just power. It's something else. Maybe you're looking for something." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't like how right he sounded. She had always told herself she didn't need anything. That power was all she would ever need. But now, after seeing the humans and fighting beside them, she wasn't so sure. "I don't know what you mean," Sarah said, turning away from him. She didn't want to talk about this. She didn't want to deal with the feelings that were beginning to rise inside her. She was supposed to be strong, cold, and focused on her mission. She couldn't let these humans distract her. She couldn't afford to care. The soldier didn't give up. He stepped closer again, his voice gentle but persistent. "Look, I don't know who you are or where you come from, but you're not alone here. We've been fighting a long time, and we've lost a lot. But you," he paused, as if searching for the right words, "you gave us a chance. You gave me a chance." Sira turned back to him, her eyes sharp. She didn't understand what he meant. He didn't even know her. He didn't know her past, her people, or the things she had done. So why did he look at her like this? "I don't need your thanks," she said, her voice cold again. "I did what was necessary." The soldier didn't back away. Instead, he smiled softly, a smile that seemed genuine and kind, not the smile of someone who expected anything in return. "I'm not thanking you," he said. "I'm just trying to understand you. You're not like anyone I've ever met. And I think you're not as alone as you think you are." Sira stared at him, her heart beating faster. She didn't understand him, but something inside her told her he wasn't lying. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had always believed. The morning came quickly. Sira woke up to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of birds. It had been a quiet night, but today felt different. The humans had set up camp near the edge of the forest, and the soldiers were busy preparing for what was to come. They knew the enemy would return. It was only a matter of time. Sira stood up from where she had been resting, her eyes scanning the area. The sky was a soft orange as the sun began to rise, and the air was filled with the smell of fresh earth. It was a beautiful morning, but the weight of the battle ahead hung heavy in the air. The human soldier from the day before, the one who had talked to her, was standing nearby, speaking with his commander. Sira had learned his name was Derek. She had expected him to be like the others, cold, distant, and focused only on survival. But he was different. He was kind, determined, and had a sense of hope that was rare among the humans. It was something that made her uneasy, but at the same time, it made her feel something. She watched him for a moment, noticing the way he spoke with the other soldiers, encouraging them. Derek had a way of making people believe in themselves. It was something Sira had never seen before. She had always believed in power, in strength. But Derek's belief in his people was something else entirely. "Sira," Derek's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him walking toward her, his face serious. "Today's the day," he said quietly. "They'll be back. We've set up defenses, but we need everyone who can fight. Are you with us?" Sira looked at him, her expression unreadable. She had come to this planet to explore, to complete her mission. But the battle had changed everything. She had fought for the humans, and now there was no turning back. She couldn't walk away. Not now. "I'm with you," she said simply, her voice cold but firm. Derek nodded, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. But he found none. Sira was a warrior, and she would fight. The battle was not over, and she would be there, fighting beside the humans. The camp quickly became busy with movement as the soldiers prepared for the battle. Sira joined them, her mind focused. The enemy had attacked once, and they would attack again. This time, they would be ready. The humans had set up defenses around the camp, small barricades made from logs and rocks, makeshift traps, and weapons scattered in key positions. Sira could see the soldiers working together, their movements efficient, their minds focused on the task ahead. They were ready. Sira stood at the edge of the camp, her hand on the hilt of her weapon. She was ready too. The familiar weight of her weapon in her hand gave her a sense of control. She had fought in many battles, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about surviving. It wasn't just about defeating the enemy. There was something more at stake now. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for these people, the humans who had accepted her, fought beside her, and believed in her. "Are you ready?" Derek asked as he walked up to her, his face determined. Sira didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out across the forest. the place where the enemy would come from. The silence was deafening. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to come. "Yes," Sarah said finally, her voice steady. "Let them come." The ground trembled beneath their feet. The enemy was close. A loud, echoing roar broke the silence, followed by the screech of weapons and the sound of engines. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline fill her veins. This was it. The battle had begun. The enemy charged forward, their dark figures emerging from the trees, moving fast and in perfect formation. They were heavily armored, their weapons glinting in the dim light. They were powerful, but Sarah knew the humans had something they didn't: determination. The first wave of enemies hit the barricades. The humans fought back with everything they had: guns, knives, and homemade explosives. Sarah moved quickly, her weapon firing in perfect sync with the humans. She took down enemy soldiers one by one, her shots precise and deadly. Derek and his team fought beside her, their strength and teamwork turning the tide of the battle. But the enemy was relentless. As one group of soldiers fell, another one took its place. The battle seemed endless, and the humans were starting to tire. Sarah could see the fear in their eyes as they fought, but she also saw something else: hope. They weren't giving up. They wouldn't give up. Derek fought alongside them, his face covered in dirt and sweat, but his eyes never wavered. He was a leader, and he led by example. Sarah fought beside him, her focus unwavering. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for something bigger. She was fighting for these people. As the battle raged on, Sarah realized something she had never felt before. She was part of something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She had a purpose, a reason to fight, and she would not let it slip away. The enemy began to retreat, but Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The battle was far from over, but for now, they had won. The humans had held their ground. "We did it," Derek said, panting as he looked around at the fallen enemies. "We survived." Sarah nodded, her heart still racing. "This is just the start. We have to be ready for the next wave." Derek looked at her, his eyes filled with respect. "We will be." Sarah didn't respond. She simply turned and walked back to the camp, ready for whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but she would face it head-on, just as she always had. The days after the battle were quiet, but tense. The humans had won, but the war was far from over. They were in a temporary victory, and the enemy would be back soon. Sarah had seen it before. Battles were never won easily, and the peace that followed was always short-lived. But this time, something felt different. Sarah felt different. She stood by the camp's edge, looking out into the forest. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the trees. The sounds of the soldiers working and preparing for the next fight seemed distant, like they were part of another world. Her mind wasn't on the battle anymore. It was on something else. Derek. Since the battle, she had found herself thinking about him more than she ever thought she would. He wasn't like the other humans. He had a kindness that was strange to her, a kindness that made her feel something she wasn't used to. He cared about the soldiers, about his people, and somehow he seemed to care about her too. He hadn't asked questions about her past. He hadn't judged her for being different. He had simply accepted her as she was, and that was something Sarah had never experienced before. It bothered her. Sarah had always been alone. Her whole life, she had relied only on herself. Trust was a weakness, and feelings were distractions. That's what she had always told herself. But now, after fighting alongside these humans, after seeing the way Derek led and cared for his people, she wasn't so sure anymore. "What's on your mind?" Derek's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle and calm. Sarah turned to face him. He was standing a few feet away, his clothes still dirty from the battle, but his eyes were clear, focused. His usual confident smile was replaced with a look of curiosity, as if he was waiting for her to answer, waiting for her to let him in. "I was just thinking." Sira said, trying to sound indifferent. "The battle. It's not over. We still have work to do." Derek nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. He stepped closer, his eyes searching her face, as if he could see something she was trying to hide. "You know," he began, "you've been fighting with us for a while now. You've been through a lot, but I've seen something in you. Something more than just the warrior." Sira stiffened, her eyes narrowing. She didn't like where this was going. She didn't want him to look at her like that. She didn't want anyone to see something inside her that she didn't even understand. "I'm just here to fight," she said quickly, trying to push him away. "I don't need anything else." But Derek didn't back down. He took another step closer, his voice soft but firm. "I don't think it's just about fighting anymore. Sira, you're different. I can see it in the way you fight, in the way you protect us. You care, even if you don't want to admit it." Sira felt a sharp pain in her chest, a feeling she couldn't explain. She didn't want to care. She had never wanted to care. But the truth was, she did care. She cared about Derek and his soldiers, more than she had ever cared about anyone before. And that scared her. "I don't need anyone," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best effort to stay calm. "I've never needed anyone." Derek didn't seem upset by her words. He just stood there, looking at her with a kind expression. "Maybe. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve someone, Sira. You don't have to be alone. Not anymore." Sira felt a rush of emotions that she couldn't control. Anger, fear, and something else. A deep, aching feeling she couldn't name. It was as if Derek's words had opened a door she had kept locked for years. The door to feelings she had buried deep inside herself. She wanted to run. She wanted to push him away and keep everything locked inside, just like she always had. But she couldn't. Not this time. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," Sira admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked away from Derek, afraid to show the vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long. "I've always been alone. I've never cared about anyone." Derek stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "It's okay to feel, Sira. It's okay to let someone in. You're not alone anymore. We're all in this together." Sira froze at his touch. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't demanding. It was gentle, comforting even, and that was what scared her the most. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to push someone away. For the first time in her life, she wanted to let someone in. "I don't know how," she said quietly, still not looking at him. "You don't have to know how," Derek said, his voice full of understanding. "You just have to trust, and I'll be here, with you, every step of the way." Sira felt her heart beat faster, and the tightness in her chest slowly began to loosen. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She didn't feel like she was just a weapon or a fighter. She felt like a person, like someone who mattered. She looked at Derek, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. His eyes were filled with kindness and something else, something warm. Sira didn't have the answers, but in that moment, she realized something. Maybe it was okay to care. Maybe it was okay to feel something. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she didn't have to be alone. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the camp. The quiet that followed the last battle felt strange. The sounds of soldiers moving and talking were softer now. It was a pause, a moment before the next fight. But Sira could feel it. The tension in the air, the weight of what was to come. She had known the war wouldn't end easily. But now, she was beginning to realize something else. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was a choice. Sira stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the darkening forest. She could hear the distant rumble of enemy forces gathering. She had heard the rumors. The enemy was planning one final massive attack. If the humans didn't stand strong, everything would be lost. She turned to see Derek walking toward her, his face tired but determined. He had been by her side through it all, leading his soldiers with courage and hope. She had never seen anyone like him before. He wasn't just a leader. He was someone who cared about his people, about her. Derek stopped beside her, his gaze also fixed on the horizon. The quiet between them was comfortable, like they didn't need to say anything. But he spoke anyway, his voice low but firm. "We've been through a lot, Sira," he said. "But this is it. The final push. After this, we'll either win or we'll lose everything. I need to know, are you with us? All the way?" Sira looked at him. She saw the seriousness in his eyes, but also something else. It wasn't just about the battle. It was about something bigger, something she had never allowed herself to think about. "I don't know if I can promise that," Sira said quietly. "I've always been alone. I've always fought alone. It's easier that way." Derek didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, as if he was waiting for her to understand. The wind rustled through the trees, and the air felt cooler. Time was running out. The decision had to be made. "You don't have to fight alone anymore," Derek said, his voice softer now. "I'm here. We're here. We're a team. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Not anymore." Sira felt something inside her stir. She didn't want to feel this way. She didn't want to need anyone. But the truth was, she did. She needed Derek. She needed the humans. They had become a part of her, whether she liked it or not. "I don't know if I can trust anyone," she admitted. "But I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to be alone." Derek gave her a small smile, the kind that made something in her chest heighten. "You don't have to be alone, Sira. You've got me. You've got all of us." Sira closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. For so long, she had told herself that caring about others was a weakness. She had kept everyone at a distance, kept her heart locked away. But now, for the first time, she realized how lonely that had made her, how empty it had felt to live a life without connection, without trust. "I don't know if I can change everything," Sira said, her voice shaky. "But I'm willing to try. For you. For all of you." Derek reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, and Sira felt a rush of emotions that she couldn't control. She had spent so many years building walls around her heart, but now, those walls were starting to crumble. Derek had shown her that there was more to life than fighting. There was more to life than survival. There was a chance for something better. "We'll make it through this," Derek said, his voice full of conviction. "Together." Sira nodded slowly, her heart beating faster. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future would hold. But she knew one thing for sure. She didn't want to face it alone anymore. The final battle was coming. The enemy was closing in, their forces ready to strike. Sira could feel the fear rising in her chest, but it wasn't the same as before. She wasn't afraid of losing. She wasn't afraid of dying. What scared her now was losing the chance to live, to be a part of something bigger than herself. As the camp began to prepare for the final battle, Sira knew that this was her choice. She could walk away and keep fighting alone, or she could stay and fight for something more. She could fight for the humans, for Derek, for herself. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running. "I'm with you," Sira said, her voice steady and strong. "All the way." Derek smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride. "Let's finish this, then." Sira turned to face the camp, her heart full of determination. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a purpose. She had a team. And together, they would face whatever came next. The final choice had been made. Now, it was time to fight.